There's a moment on every first date that has nothing to do with romance. The check arrives. It sits there, face down, for maybe 4 seconds. And in those 4 seconds, a very old piece of machinery starts running in both people at the table. Who reaches, how fast, whether it's a gesture or a relief, and what the whole thing is supposed to mean. Same man, same table, same 4 seconds. And the only thing that ever changes is the number in his account. So let's run it properly. One man, same face, same jokes, same slightly too earnest way of asking questions. 6 incomes: 0, 30,000, 60, 100, 250, a million a year. Nothing about him improves. He doesn't get better looking, funnier, or kinder. He doesn't learn a single thing about how to talk to people. We're changing one variable, and it's the one nobody's supposed to admit is a variable at all. And here's what makes this worth 20 minutes. Everybody assumes the story is that more money means more options. That's the boring part. And it's true, and it happens in about the first third of this. The interesting part is what happens after that, because past a certain rung, the dating doesn't get better. It gets unverifiable. Something gets taken away that he never gets back, and by the top he'd trade a very large amount of money to have it again, and it isn't for sale. There's a specific thing he can do at 30,000 a year that he genuinely cannot do at a million, no matter what he spends. And by the end you'll see exactly what it is, and when it left, and why he didn't notice it leaving. 6 rungs, 1 man, 1 table. Let's start at the bottom. 0. Here's the first surprise. At 0, he doesn't get rejected. That's not the story at all. At 0, he removes himself, quietly, in advance, before anyone gets the chance. Someone he likes suggests getting a drink, and he says, yeah, definitely, soon. And then he lets it die. He kills it himself, and he tells himself he's being realistic, and calls it timing. And he's not lying exactly. Every reason he gives himself is a real reason. That's what makes it airtight. The timing, genuinely, is bad. He genuinely is going to sort things out first. There is no sentence in his own head that he could point to and identify as the false one. And that's precisely how a decision disguises itself as a circumstance. Because he's done the arithmetic, and the arithmetic says no. Drinks are $40 he doesn't have. And it's not the $40. It's what the $40 would require. The conversation about work, the question about what's next, the whole hour of managing a story he doesn't have a good version of yet. So he opts out. And the not dating isn't a consequence of being broke. It's a decision he makes over and over that he'd swear was made for him. What money does at 0 isn't make him unattractive. It makes him withdraw. It puts a small permanent apology in everything he says. He answers the what do you do question like a man clearing his throat. And watch what he does with the question itself. He overexplains. He gives the whole context, the situation, the timing, the thing that fell through, the plan for the spring. Nobody asked for any of that. A man with a job says 4 words and moves on. He says 40. And every one of them is a small defense in a trial nobody convened. And people can feel that, not the poverty. Nobody can smell your bank balance across a bar. They feel the apology. They feel a man who's already decided that he's a bad bet and who's giving off that decision at a frequency he doesn't know he's transmitting. He thinks he's being rejected for having no money. He's being rejected for having agreed with the verdict before anyone rendered it. Those are not the same thing, and he will not be able to tell them apart for another decade. There's one more thing at 0, and it's the thing he'll spend the rest of his life trying to buy back. If somebody chooses him here, right here, with nothing, no prospects, no story, he knows exactly what it means. There's no other explanation available. Nobody's playing a long game on a man with an empty account. It's the cleanest information he will ever receive about another human being. and he's too busy being ashamed to notice he's holding it. And if it happens, if someone does choose him here, he won't believe it. That's the tragedy of the bottom rung. He'll spend the whole thing waiting for them to come to their senses, reading every ordinary bad mood as the beginning of the end, and he will very likely damage it himself from the inside, out of a certainty that it was never really his to keep. 30,000. Now he dates. And now the dating has a budget, and the budget is the fourth person at every table. He picks the place, always, and it looks like chivalry. And it's logistics. He's picking the place because he knows what's on the menu and he knows what he can absorb without flinching. He orders second, always second. He waits to hear what she gets so he can calibrate, so nothing he orders is conspicuously careful. It's a small skill. He's very good at it. He developed it without ever deciding to. He suggests the wok instead of the second bar, and the wok is genuinely nicer. That's the joke of it. The wok is better. They talk for 2 hours. And he'd never admit that the wok was free before it was good. And here's the thing he can't see from inside it. None of this is visible. Not one person across from him has ever detected it. They think he likes woks. They think he's decisive about restaurants. The entire apparatus is running silently, costing him something real and producing exactly 0 impressions in anybody else's mind. And when the check comes, he reaches. Every time. Even the times it hurts. Because the reach is not about the money, it's about the 4 seconds. And what not reaching would say in a language he doesn't get to choose. Then the card goes down. And there's that half second where he's watching a stranger's hands more carefully than he'd like to admit. Nobody ever notices. That's the entire point of the skill. The dates are fine. Some are good. Some go somewhere. He is not suffering, and he is not being turned down for being poor, and if you asked him, he'd say money isn't really a factor at this level. But something's running in the background the entire time. There's a version of him that's relaxed, and this isn't it. There's a percentage of his attention, 10, 15%, permanently allocated to the arithmetic of the evening. And the person across from him is getting 85% of a man and doesn't know it. They just experience someone slightly guarded, slightly effortful, in a way that's hard to name and easy to feel. That's the real price at 30,000. Not the missed dates. The tax on his presence, 60,000. These are the best dating years of his life, and he will not know that until it's over. Here's what happens at 60. Money leaves the table. It's the only rung where it does. He's got enough that the check isn't a calculation, and not enough that it's a signal. Nobody's impressed. Nobody's doing math. It's simply not part of the evening. No one performs anything. He's not proving he's not broke, and he's not managing being flush. Both of those are jobs, and at $60,000 a year he is briefly unemployed from both of them at once. It's the only window in his entire adult life where the money in his account has nothing to say about the person in his chair. So for the first time, the entire man shows up. All 100% of him. He's funny in the unforced way you're only funny when nothing's being managed. He suggests the expensive place occasionally and the cheap place more often, and neither one means anything. And he does well, noticeably better than at 30, and it has almost nothing to do with the extra $30,000. It's that the 15% came home. The other thing that happens, he can't tell anyone's motives apart, because there are no motives to tell apart. 60,000 is not a prize. Nobody is dating a man for $60,000 a year, so everyone at his table is there for approximately the reasons people are supposed to be there. He has perfect information and no idea he has it. He'll spend the next 20 years and a great deal of money trying to get back to a table like this one, and he won't manage it. He'd tell you these years were unremarkable. Ask him at 45 which era of his life had the best relationships in it, and he'll say something vague about being young and having energy. He'll get the reason wrong. It wasn't the energy and it wasn't the youth. It was that for a few years, in his 30s, he was the only thing he brought to the table. If you ever hear a wealthy man say his best relationships happened before the money, and you will, they all say it, and it always sounds like nostalgia or a humble brag. This is what he's actually describing. Not simpler times, cleaner data, 100,000. Something switches on here, and he notices it immediately, and it feels fantastic for about a year. He doesn't say the number, nobody says the number, but it leaks through the neighborhood, the ease, the fact that he books the thing without checking. Money is loud even when you keep your mouth shut. The attention goes up, measurably, more matches, more replies, more warmth from people who weren't warm before, and there is absolutely no honest way to pretend this isn't happening. And this is where it'd be easy to get ugly about it. So let's be accurate instead. Nobody is doing anything wrong. Wanting a partner who isn't drowning is not a character flaw. It's how anybody with a functioning survival instinct has ever chosen anybody. Stability is attractive. It's been attractive for the entire history of the species. Nobody's a villain here, and he knows that. That's what makes it unresolvable. If he could believe people were shallow, he'd have somewhere to put the feeling. He could be bitter, and bitterness at least has a shape. But he can't. Because he'd choose stability too, and did, and does. So the feeling has nowhere to go and just circulates. But a question arrives, and once it arrives, it never leaves. Is this for me or for this? And the honest answer is that there is no answer. There's no test. There's no clean way to check because every method he can imagine either insults someone who's innocent or gets passed easily by someone who isn't. There's no experiment available. So he carries it into good nights, into the moments that should be uncomplicated. There's a person laughing at something he said, and he's happy, and about 4% of him is quietly wondering, and the 4% is undetectable. Nobody across the table has any idea. It doesn't ruin anything. It doesn't end a single relationship. It just sits there, a permanent small distance between him and every good moment he has from here on. Close enough to touch, never quite close enough to disappear into. 4% doesn't sound like much. It's the exact same 4%, incidentally, that he was spending on the check at $30,000. He got the 15% back at 60, and now he's paying a new tax in a different currency on the way up. He is more successful at dating than he's ever been, and less certain about it than he's ever been. And those two facts arrive on the same day and never separate again. And he'd never trade it back. Ask him at 100,000 if he'd return to 60 and he'd laugh at you. He's not wrong to laugh. He's got more, he's doing better. Everything on paper improved. He just also acquired something on that rung that he'll be carrying for the next 30 years, and there was no moment where anybody asked him whether he wanted it. 250,000. Now it's not a question anymore. It's a filter, and he runs it on everyone, and he starts to hate himself a little for it. Because the attention is now overwhelming and completely unreliable, and he cannot switch it off. He can't be a normal man at a table. The information is out, always, before he sits down. So he starts testing people. He doesn't call it that. He'd never call it that. He suggests the cheap place on purpose to see. He underdresses. He gets vague about work and watches the face for the flicker. He mentions a fake bad quarter and pays attention to what happens next. And it never works, and he does it anyway, because the alternative is not knowing. It doesn't work for a reason that takes him years to see. Everybody passes. Someone who genuinely likes him passes because they genuinely like him. Someone who's running a longer play also passes because passing is trivially easy when you know you're being watched, and they always know. The test has no failure state. It generates zero information. All it does is make him a man who runs tests. And that's the real corrosion at 250, not the people, him. He walks into every dinner as a slightly worse version of himself, evaluating, filing, checking, and that version is genuinely less pleasant company than the man who had $60,000 and no suspicions. He's now attracting more people than ever, with a worse product than he's ever had. And the people who'd be best for him, the ones with their own thing going, who don't need a single thing from him, are precisely the ones least likely to tolerate being quietly audited across a table. He is filtering for the wrong trait. He thinks he's filtering for sincerity. He's filtering for tolerance of suspicion. And there's a specific kind of person who's very comfortable being suspected, and it isn't the kind he wants. The genuinely good ones just leave. Not dramatically. They don't accuse him of anything, because there's nothing to accuse him of. They just don't call back. Something about the evening was slightly cold in a way they couldn't name, and there are other evenings, and they go have those instead. He never finds out. He never even knows they were the good ones. $1 million a year. At the top, he does the thing nobody predicts. He hides it, not out of humility, out of exhaustion. Because he's watched the face do the thing 1,000 times, that second and a half where the warmth reorganizes itself into evaluation. And he cannot stand to watch it happen again over a plate of pasta. So he gets vague. He drives the older car. He says he works in software and lets it sit there flat and boring and changes the subject. And it fails. It has to, because now he's built a relationship on a foundation with a hole in it, and every week the hole gets more expensive to fill. If he tells her in month 1, he's watching for the flicker. If he tells her in month 8, he's just informed someone that he's been managing her, testing her, running a covert experiment on her sincerity for 8 months. And she's now correctly furious. And she's entitled to be, and there's no defense he can offer that doesn't make it worse. He's constructed a trap where honesty and dishonesty both detonate. Every option is a bad option. He built it himself, out of a completely reasonable fear. And notice what he's actually done. He's taken the one thing he wanted, to be known without the number in the way, and made it structurally impossible, because there is no longer any version of the truth arriving on its own. It has to be disclosed. And a disclosed truth, timed and staged and withheld, is a different object entirely than a truth that was just always there. And so at the very top, sitting on more money than he ever imagined, he arrives somewhere that looks eerily familiar. He's not dating much. Not because nobody wants him, everybody wants him, that's the problem, but because he's opted out, quietly, in advance, before anyone gets the chance. Someone suggests dinner, and he says, yeah, definitely, soon, and lets it die, which is exactly, precisely, to the syllable, what he did at 0. Same withdrawal, same self-removal, same man telling himself he's being realistic. The bottom and the top produce identical behavior through opposite mechanisms. At 0, he thought he had nothing to offer. And at $1 million, he can't tell what's being accepted. And both times, the room is full of people who'd have said yes. That's what makes it worth stopping on. At 0, there were people who'd have chosen him. He never gave them the chance. At $1 million, there are people who'd have loved him precisely and only for himself. He never gives them the chance either. The population of people willing to say yes was never the constraint. It never once was. The whole ladder, and he's back in the same chair. So what actually happened here? The easy story, the one that gets 1 million views and a comment section full of men agreeing with each other, is that people want money. And the more you have, the more they want it. And that's why it all gets worse. That story is wrong, and it's wrong in a way that costs the people who believe it real years of their lives. Because look at what actually happened at each rung. At 0, nobody rejected him. He withdrew. At 30, nobody judged his ordering. He was managing it alone, invisibly. At 100, nobody said anything about the money. He introduced the question himself, silently, on a good night. At 250, nobody failed his tests. He invented the tests. At 1,000,000, nobody lied to him. He was the one concealing. Every single wound on this ladder was self-inflicted. Not one of them required another person to do anything at all. The number never actually changed how people saw him. It changed what he could know. And then he filled the gap with a story every time. And the story was always about himself. Here's the cleanest way to see it. At 0, he asked, "Do they want me even though I have nothing?" At 1,000,000, he asked, "Do they want me or the thing I have?" Those look like opposite questions. They're the same question. It's the same man asking whether he personally, stripped of all context, is enough. He asked it broke, and he asked it rich, and the money never answered it, because it was never a question money was capable of answering. He thought he was trying to find out if they were dating his number. He was the one dating his number. He'd been doing it the whole time, pricing himself at every rung and reading every room for confirmation. He got to $1,000,000 a year still asking the exact question he asked at 0, which means the number was never the variable. He just kept moving it and hoping the question would go away. That's why the ladder never fixed anything. You can't answer a question about your worth by changing a number because the number is what you were using to ask it. Every rung gave him a new figure and the same question, and he read the new figure as evidence and kept climbing, and the question sat exactly where it had always sat, waiting. And the thing he lost, the thing he'd pay anything to get back and can't, was never love or options or attention. He has more of all three than he's ever had. It was the ability to be told the truth by accident, to sit at a table and get clean information about another human being without having to design a test for it, because there was nothing on the table worth lying about. That's the thing that isn't for sale, not at any number. He could put $1,000,000 on that table right now, and the one thing he could not buy with it is a stranger who doesn't know it's there. The money buys every door in the building and locks exactly one. And it's the one he ends up standing outside of at 50 in a very good suit, wondering how he got there. He had that at $60,000 a year, and he didn't notice. He had it perfectly, absolutely at 0, and he was too ashamed to look at it. That's the whole thing. Every rung bought him something, and every rung took the same thing away, a little at a time, so quietly that he only ever noticed the buying. The check still arrives. It still sits there face down for 4 seconds. Same man, same table. And by the end, he's the only one at it who's doing any math.